Hey everyone, it's Helen from SMB Deal Hunter. Today we have Nathan Gregory with us, an entrepreneur who acquired Autobody News, which is the top news publisher for the collision repair industry. I'm really looking forward to hearing Nathan's story today. Nathan, it's great to have you on.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Helen.
Nathan, tell us how you got into the space, how you got into buying a business. What were you kind of doing before?
Well, I've had a weird career path. I was in the entertainment industry before buying this business, but as I'll mention, it really kind of aligns. But I started as a homeschooled kid. I was homeschooled all through high school, and then ultimately after college went into the music and entertainment industry, which then took me into the marketing side of that. And which ultimately led to the desire to have my own thing, have a business, control my destiny, and I felt that the right path for me and I have a business partner for both of us was let's acquire something that's working, let's acquire something that's been around for a long time that we can come in, roll up our sleeves, add value, and grow. And that's the 30-second version of my background.
Did you have a bunch of sort of side projects or the startups or things like that that you had worked on in the past, or was this kind of like your first foray into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, good question. I don't think we could have done this without all the different other things that we had been involved with before. So I guess it's really like four phases I went through. The first one was, first early exposure to deals. So I first got my itch for acquisitions through real estate, which started with flipping raw land. So I was buying raw land in California and Utah and Arizona and Oregon. And that then evolved to buying and managing commercial multifamily real estate here in California. And that's when my partner and I first partnered, and that was about 7 years ago. Um, and that was my first experience with leverage, with commercial debt, with asset management. And I quickly realized the value creation potential with commercial real estate because you increase the income, which then directly increases the value of the building. And at the same time, I was starting to hear things online and in books and in podcasts about acquisition entrepreneurship. And it really hit me. And I thought, whoa, you could do this with a business, with a small business, and do the same thing. Although you have far greater opportunity to grow the business than you do a piece of real estate where you're limited by market, the market dictates rents. And that kind of brought me into phase two, which was really learning the business buyout model. And that was probably around 2019. I started learning about buying and leveraging debt to acquire a small business. I saw how powerful it was to apply the same principles as real estate. And I read all the courses, I read all the books, I took all the courses, I watched the videos, listened to so many podcasts, and really dug into the world of search funds and acquisition entrepreneurships. And so while I was doing that, I also built and sold a beer koozie business. Don't ask me how I don't even remember how I started down the path. I'm not a big beer drinker, and if I were, I'm not a big koozie user. But anyways, it made a lot of sense, and we grew it to be the top selling koozie brand on Amazon, and ended up selling that in 2021. And look, you're going through COVID. You've got inventory issues. You've got demand going down to zero, then going through the roof. And so it was a real lesson for me in how to manage cash flow, how to manage inventory, how to manage marketing. We spent a lot of money on marketing and making sure it was precise and effective. And all those things have translated into owning the company we own today. But I'll stop there in case there's anything you wanna dig into before I go further.
Yeah, no, I'm curious at what point, did you decide to like really pull the trigger on going down the business acquisition route? Were you sort of casually looking at deals for years? Or were you and your partner like, all right, we sold this business, now's the time.
I think there was a book that came out, I don't know when, within the past 10 years, I think, written by Peter Thiel called Zero to One. And I read it. It's a great book. I don't know that I'm a 0 to 1 kind of person. Now I've done it on a smaller scale. However, I guess throughout my career, and mainly I would say working with when I was in the entertainment and music and talent part of my career, I worked with really prominent musicians, really prominent entertainers, and I would see, okay, here's what's going on. Here's this opportunity to grow what we're doing here. Here's this opportunity for new content or new partnerships or new licenses or whatever it might be that I guess I've just been more conditioned to say, what's something that exists that I can go in and make better? And I just have far more ideas when it comes to that. Now, it wasn't intuitive as to how you connect that with entrepreneurship until I discovered acquisition entrepreneurship. And then, once I did, it just clicked. It just made complete sense for me.
What were some of the deals you first looked at? Or, when you and your partner started going into the search, did you guys have sort of like a buy box or an investment
Yeah.
thesis going into it? What did that look like?
I guess that was kind of phase three where our early deals and pivots, we went in and said, okay, we want to buy a home services business because everyone was talking about home services business. They're essential. They're usually pretty durable. They're recession resilient. All the things that you're looking for. Sometimes they have recurring revenue, and there's still challenges with those kind of businesses. But we looked at those criteria and said, okay, that's right for us. Hey, we've worked with many types of contractors with real estate. We could do that, and um, we made offers on companies. I think fortunately for us, they didn't go through for one reason or other. Usually us, we would uncover something in early due diligence that whether the numbers weren't quite right or there was some aspect of the business, whether it be key person risk or something where we felt that it just wasn't right and we wouldn't go forward with them. And ironically, because we'll get to the business that we own now, which is a media and marketing company for the collision repair sector, the automotive collision repair sector. Ironically, we were actually close to acquiring a package of auto repair shops. They weren't collision repair; it was mechanical repair. But we did actually get down the road a little bit. Again, same issue. That was a non-brokered opportunity, and months into that process, getting into the financials, finding out oh, this shop that was positioned as a very profitable shop actually doesn't make any profit because of the way the owner's running it. And it's difficult. I think it would be good to touch on that later is, brokered versus proprietary searches and the pros and cons and at least our point of view on that. But anyways, we learned a lot about those kind of things, but we kept striking out, Helen. It was probably a year and a half of just grinding through it. Lots of conversations, lots of NDAs, lots of combing through financials, and handful of offers, and then not getting anywhere. And then we stopped in 2022, I guess maybe mid late 2022, and said, "Look, this isn't working. What are we really good at? What do we know? What is our background in? And what can we find that really leverages that?" But it's also because we were approaching this as we wanted to do a leveraged buyout. We wanted it to use debt as part of the acquisition. And so we needed a business in an industry that was stable, that was not going to be volatile like, what we had been used to in the entertainment side of media. And so B2B media was one of the types of industries we were interested in. And specifically B2B media for an industry that was really essential, really durable, because you're kind of riding along with the industry. And when we came across Autobody News in early 2023, it was a 42-year-old company. The owners who owned it, they'd owned it for about 12 years. They had acquired it. They were the fourth owners, so we would be the fifth owners. So what's one of the things you're concerned about when you're looking at an acquisition? What's going to happen when I take ownership? Is this going to be able to successfully transfer? We saw that this business had transferred, many times before, and that was one of the reasons why we were quite comfortable with it. But anyways, that was kind of our long and winding journey. You
That's
know,
pretty that's pretty
yeah,
crazy with it being sort of the fifth, you guys being the fifth owners. I don't think I've heard of an
I
SMB where
know.
there's been
I don't
that
I don't
many
think I
trans
have either.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, you kind of touched on sort of brokered versus proprietary search.
Yeah.
Love to dive a little bit deeper into that because, I'm curious how you ended up finding this deal, but also during that entire search phase, where were you looking? Was it mostly like brokered sites? Did you, go meet people in person? Like what did you do and what worked, what didn't work?
What worked and what didn't work. So, because we didn't have a super narrow buy box, we didn't feel like a proprietary search was right. I think, look, if you have all the time in the world, you could have a wide buy box in a proprietary search, but that is a lot of volume of outgoing activity. And so for us, we live in Southern California. We have families. We wanted to stay here. We weren't open to going wherever geographically we might find an opportunity. We wanted something we could ultimately drive to. And so it was, or a business that was already sort of remote or digital in nature. But again, if we were going to put leverage on it, we were not going for a fly by night type of digital business. And so for us, we just felt like it was natural to go towards deals that were brokered. Also, I guess having the experience with real estate, we just had so much benefit from dealing with the brokers that we have. Look, everyone has had, or some people say they've had terrible experiences, and I'm sure those are very true. I guess fortunately for us, we really haven't had terrible experiences with brokers at all. And so it just felt natural to us. Also, look, when you're talking to a business owner who had no plan to sell and you get in touch with them, they have no idea what their business is worth, nor is it prepared to sell. So usually by the time a broker brings a deal to market, they've been working with that seller for potentially 3 years on positioning the financials, positioning the operations, preparing the seller for the process. And so you're going to be on the front end of that process when you're dealing with a seller directly. And look, if you're very narrow on an industry, it could make a lot of sense. But for us, we didn't feel like it worked. And so to your question, Helen, we were on Biz by Sell, we were on Axial, we were on all these. I guess there's probably a handful of other sites. You find that pretty much all the same deals are everywhere. And then we were establishing relationships with brokers. We kind of treated it like a sales process. It was just constantly reaching out to new brokers, telling them our story, telling them what we're looking to do. And then also we were just combing through listings. And that's actually how we found Autobody News. It was a listing. And so it was not a broker that we had a relationship with.
No, that's great. I think there's a common sort of misconception that all sort of deals that are on a listing are bad, like listing site are bad deals because, why would they be listed? But I think, so many people find the business they ultimately buy just from a listing site. There, you just have to
Yeah.
really filter through all of them is the real sort of challenge.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
there's so many, but you find out if you spend enough time in it, you start to sort of know all the deals in your whatever your criteria is. You just know them all, and you've looked at them all, and you know, 80% of them there's something really wrong with it. But there's always a handful that are worth it.
I'm curious, tell us more about sort of Autobody news when you first came across the listing. What kind of jumped out at you? You mentioned, how many years it'd been in business or how it had transferred hands a bunch of times, but what else kind of jumped out at you? Just tell us more
Well,
about that.
from a B2B media standpoint, and just to give, if anyone's not familiar with what B2B media is, some people might think of it as a trade publication or a trade publisher. You know, for pretty much every industry, there's a handful of publishers who they provide news on what's going on in the industry. And so if you're an executive or an owner or an operator or someone in the industry, there's nuances of things happening that are important. And so there's specific media that covers that industry. And usually the business model of these companies follows one of two paths or both, but one of them is they provide really high quality content and data, and their audience pays to subscribe to it. So it's a subscription business. Or it's an advertising based business where the industry has a lot of vendors and suppliers who are trying to market to the audience. And you have to know the type of industry you're focused on to know which one is better. Um, but for us, when we were looking at Autobody News, it had a strong brand, it had a loyal audience, and clear opportunities for growth. We publish 5 magazines every month. Now we go to our audience is the US, but we publish different regional magazines. And so the prior ownership, that was their focus. It was like print, 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 print. Let's make a great magazine. Let's really focus on that. And for us, we saw, okay, this is a brand the industry knows and loves, has been with the industry for decades, but the digital leaves a lot to be desired, and the marketing services are non-existent. It's just, sort of standard old school advertising. And so that was for us, we saw, okay, here's a stable base, but real opportunity for growth.
So tell us more about, their previous business model. It was advertising based, who was
Hmm.
advertising in the magazines? Were they kind of, was it, a ton of recurring revenue from the same advertisers being in there, or like what kind of, tell us more about that.
Yeah. We kind of have two classes of advertisers with Autobody News. One is, high volume, lower transaction size, lower account size, and those are, when you crashed your car and you take it into collision shop, and let's say you need a new hood. Okay. Well, the collision shop has a choice. They can buy, so if you have you've got a Ford F-150, they can get that hood from the Ford dealership. So that's an original manufacturer hood, or they could get an aftermarket hood. Sometimes, if your insurance company requires one or the other, sometimes the Ford in this case will require one of the, and so there's all kinds of nuances to it. But the point is, the car dealerships, they sell cars out the front, they sell wholesale parts out the back. And so wholesale parts, which they sell to the collision shops and repair shops around their region, those dealerships, they market with us. And so with those, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dealerships across the country that advertise with Autobody News, and they're trying to reach those collision shops. So when they need to buy that new hood, they're going to go to Helen's Ford down the road. The other class is what you call, kind of the vendors and suppliers of the industry. So that's software companies, it's big tools and equipments companies, it's paint. Paint when you get your car, um, you scrape your car, they got to refinish it. The paint's very expensive. It's very high quality. The paint, second to parts, paint is the largest cost of in terms of materials for a car repair, a collision, repair. And so all those companies, they also want to reach the collision shop because if you're a collision shop, you're worth 6 to 7 figures over, call it 3 years for a paint company. So if a paint company acquires a new collision shop, it's worth a lot of money to them.
Wow.
So hopefully that gives you kind of a sense of what our market looks like.
No, that's super interesting. Can you share a little bit more about, how big Autobody News was when you acquired it, in terms of, maybe size of business, but also just, what the team looked like and
Sure. The business, it's in the, few $1 million revenue range. It's a full-time team of about 12. And then we've grown the I'd say call it the freelance and part-time team to a point where all in we're probably about 25 people. And that's what the business looks like at this point. We're going to continue adding more full-time, more part-time. We've kept a lot of the things that are core to the business. It's really just that plus we've added marketing services. Our mission, our purpose is to really be a full funnel marketing solution for all the collision industry vendors. We want to give them the best audience, the most engaged audience, the most segmented audience, and the most effective marketing solutions to reach that audience. And so that's the type of team that we're developing to be able to do that.
let's go back to sort of like pre, I guess once you kind of got, um maybe not even under LOI, but once you found the business, how long did it
Yeah.
take for you guys to sort of get under LOI and then close the deal? And what did that process look like?
Yeah, good question. We found the deal. I want to say it was somewhere between February and April of 2023. And it was relatively quick to get under LOI. Our process was we made an offer, and the offer, listed the I guess the material terms more or less of what we wanted to pursue. And that was, accepted by the seller. It's non-binding by anyone. And then we did an LOI, and that also took relatively quick. And then from there, so let's just say we were under LOI in April, maybe early May, but I think it was probably April of 2023. And we closed on August 1st of 2023. So there were no like big delays or anything. It just took that long. And most of that I would say was driven by the SBA process. That was a real grind, but we're glad to have them as a partner, but it was a grind.
No, that's super interesting. And how did
Yeah.
you go about structuring the deal with the former owners?
It was a pretty standard structure. It was they because an SBA loan was part of it, they got a large portion of the deal in cash, and there was also a seller note. There was actually a couple seller notes the way we had structured it. One was a bit more standard, one was related to some working capital. And it was a way of bridging a gap in understanding of net working capital, which is, for someone who's not does not have a private equity background, or when you're dealing with sellers who don't really understand working capital in a business, and that it seems like that is a constant thing that comes up with searchers, and it was with us too, but we managed to come up with a solution with a type of like a second seller note, so it worked out.
If you don't mind, I'd love to hear more. I love hearing when people get
Yeah.
creative with the seller notes. And yeah, what like tell us more about that, especially that second note. You said the first one is sort of like a traditional seller note.
Yeah.
And
So yeah, the first one was really a traditional seller note. The second one was, we had, and I'd highly recommend this to anyone, is get some form of quality of earnings. I wouldn't say it was a super robust quality of earnings, but we did have someone who was helping us with that. And, he gave us a version that said, look, I think this is probably a little conservative, but here's what I think from a working capital standpoint you guys need to have in this deal. And it was frankly more than we had thought. And it was after I think it was after we had the LOI signed. So we had to go back and say, look, we need this, here's an idea we have to structure this additional seller note for this working capital. And it wasn't a substantial amount of money, but um and the seller wasn't thrilled about that. But I think we what's really important is you develop a great relationship with the seller. And we had a great relationship with the seller. And going back to the brokered versus proprietary, there's no way this deal would have closed without a broker. Um, he was so calm, cool, navigated challenges throughout the whole thing, and I could not have seen the deal. I think things that, we were a bit more non-emotional about it, a bit more, um, because we were in the business to find and acquire a business, and the seller, this was their moment. They were retiring, and it had to be perfect. It had to be right. They had all kinds of emotions tied up in it, and so it was just so crucial to have that broker there in that process, I'd say.
yeah, no, I totally see that. Especially,
Yeah,
that's one of the most challenging things of like the proprietary search and closing an off-market deal is, the seller not usually having, this is like the first time most of them have gone through the transaction.
yeah,
So that makes sense. And what did you mentioned financing with an SBA loan. Did you guys put the down payment in yourselves? And what did that
yeah.
SBA process
We
look
didn't have
like?
any, we didn't have any equity investors. We didn't want any equity investors. Um, having done millions and millions of dollars of commercial real estate loans before, we kind of knew a bit what the process was like. You're just barfing up everything about your financial life. And at that point, if you're doing this with a partner, Helen, I know you do this with your husband, so it's a little easier. But if anyone listening or watching is doing this with a partner, make sure you guys have established a good relationship because you are just exposing everything about your personal financial life to each other, and you just have to be very comfortable with that because I'm sure there's ways to do it without doing that, but it's an awful lot easier because you're just sending documents, you're on emails, it's getting dumped into folders, and especially with the SBA, they're combing through everything about your life, every type of insurance you have, every property you have, every business or entity you're associated with or your spouse is associated with, and anytime you've gone right on red when the light wasn't right and you weren't allowed to go right on red. They know everything and they dig into everything. They want to know it all. And but again, back to the broker thing, we worked with an SBA loan broker, and the bank that gave us the loan, we'd never even heard of the bank. And so again, the broker taking us through that process was super helpful. I don't know. I think I have a bias towards working with brokers. I've always found them in every instance to be helpful. Business, real estate, debt, insurance, all of it. It's always been helpful to me.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
I love hearing that because I think, a lot of people have negative experiences, but I also think that's there are always good people out there, and I think it just is gonna obviously depend.
I
Um
wonder if it was, you know, when I worked, while we were going through the process of acquiring this business, I was still a talent agent at a major entertainment talent agency, and
a broker of your own right.
yeah, so I was gonna say I was kind of a broker of talent, and so maybe that's where the bias. I don't know, but I've just always found them to be helpful, and it's on your perspective. That's key.
And tell us more about, you were doing this process sort of part-time. You were still working at the talent
Yeah.
agency. Did you at some point quit? Were you working both jobs at the same time? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, when we acquired the business, we left what we were doing in the entertainment industry because it required, it's interesting. We're full time in Autobody News, but we approached it differently than the seller had. And the seller was, they were, when I say they, there was two partners. They were running the business, but the main woman who was in charge when we took over, she was also handling sales. And we didn't want to be operationally involved. And so we brought in a senior sales rep to take over the accounts that she was handling. And so we didn't approach it in the same way, but we did, fully dive into this business right off the bat.
Got it. No,
But
that's
during the
interesting.
acquisition process, yeah, it was hectic. And in the entertainment industry, all I really did was deals. So that also gave me, and quite frankly, these were substantial deals with a lot more combativeness oftentimes and emotion. And so I guess I had developed a stomach for this. Same with my partner. So again, we had that element that was different in the seller. And so we were just used to doing deals all the time and used to deals falling apart and not letting that ruin you. And
I love that.
and so that helps.
Tell us more about sort of what else you guys focused on during diligence. You mentioned you developed a great relationship with the seller, which I think is
Hmm.
crucial to the success of that diligence period when tensions are high. But yeah, curious, what else did you dig into? How did you kind of run that process?
Knowing what we know now, we would have done it differently. But I think we didn't do a half bad job. Um, we focused on the things we thought were important, and those were, the quality of the customers. Um, how many were they? What are their average order values? What is their lifetime value? All that kind of stuff. In that process, we realized that the business did not have a good way of organizing data. It was all in spreadsheets and not really structured in the way that was super useful. So that was one aspect of it. Another aspect of it was, I'd say, key man risk. So like I mentioned, the one of the sellers, she was a general manager. She handled the sales for some of the biggest companies, biggest accounts in the industry. And so we had to sort of ascertain, is that a risk? Is her stepping away going to jeopardize the ability to go out and close, deals for 2024 and beyond with these companies? And we obviously didn't speak to any customers before closing, but again, I think this is where having some kind of domain expertise is important because we were able to look at enough pieces and identify, okay, the reputation of the business is X, the relationship between the seller and these companies is Y, and it seems that they are customers because of the reputation of the business. Sure, there might be a great relationship there, but through all the ways we went looking at it, we could figure out that it wasn't driven by the relationship. It wasn't that she goes and they go. And that proved, but it did make us nervous to some degree, but we felt comfortable enough and it proved to work just fine. And so that worked out well. There's a handful of other things I think we focused on. Being a media business, we looked at things like what's the quality of the domain, the website, autobodynews.com. What's the, what's the SEO profile of it? What's this? What's that? What's the audience list look like? I think again, there's things that we would have looked at more deeply than we if we knew now what we didn't know then. And it's not that we later uncovered problems, it's just that we have a better understanding of the business and the industry now. And we still would have done it 100%, but I
I'm
think we
curious.
uncovered the good stuff at least.
I'm curious what you kind of wish you did differently, sort of hindsight 2020, now with what
Yeah.
you know now.
I think we would have tried to understand the audience composition and how it was put together and how it was organized a little better. We would have tried to understand different things about the customers. So, for example, one of a couple of the metrics that we track much better now is net revenue retention and client retention. And we didn't really think of, no, we kind of looked at it without using those terms, without knowing to think in those terms, um, because those are important things for, how you have to replace churn or how you focus on growing the top accounts. And so there was little things like that that I think we would have paid more attention to. Um,
I'm
there's
curious
not
for
there's not much.
someone.
It's not that complicated of a business, ultimately.
No, that's great. I'm curious for someone who's, maybe interested in buying like a B2B media company or something similar, maybe in a different niche than yours.
Hmm.
What are sort of, the KPIs one should be shooting for when it comes to like net revenue retention or client retention that you would want to see?
Well, the gold standard is you want, 100% net revenue retention and you want greater than 80% client retention. You're always going to have some client churn, but as you do, you want to be growing the account values, the average annual sales of your current accounts. Um, I will say it isn't quite what you asked, but I think there's a couple other things. Speaking to someone who may be interested in this space or may be curious about this space, one thing that I learned was that, and again, I like to say we were smart enough to know it in advance. We weren't, but after finding out about it, we thought, oh, well, this is good. That's good where we are. Is if you're going to buy a B2B media business in an industry that, and the business model relies on advertising, what's really important is that there's big CapEx spends in that industry. And the reason being is, um, take financial services, for example. If you're a B2B media company for financial advisors, um, they don't need to buy big pieces of equipment. They don't need to buy or say insurance brokers. They don't need to buy, they buy a computer, they buy a phone. That's about it. And so what's much more valuable, now they might buy software or subscribe to software, but even those aren't huge investments. And so in those markets, it tends to be more of a audience subscriber business model. But if you're an advertiser driven one, you need a market where there's big CapEx investments because if the audience is buying things that cost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, then those companies can justify spending a lot of money to acquire a customer. And if you can provide them repeatably, reliably, predictably that stream of prospects and customers, well then, you're worth a lot of money to them.
No, that's great insight. That's super interesting. Um, I'm curious, just going back to like, we spoke about sort of it took you what, like 4 or so months to get from LI to close. What
Hmm.
did that transition period look like for you? You mentioned this sort of like key man risk that you felt comfortable with ultimately. But what were you guys focused on sort of during the initial couple of months? Was this were the sellers still involved during a period
Oh
of
my God. It was chaos. It was absolute chaos because, you know, I was I was, working up until and even through the close of the transaction. So I've got these big, talent deals that can't fall apart because I'm a good person to my word and I want things to continue on and transition nicely over to other people with that. And then we retained all the team when we took over. And so you have really apprehensive people not knowing what's going on with the company. And then also, it's not a super cyclical business. There's a little bit of cyclicality to the revenue. However, there's tremendous cyclicality to the sales cycle. So almost all of our revenue with the big national companies is booked in Q4 and Q1. Okay.
time?
So we took over in August, right before Q4. So we had to really rapidly learn the industry, rapidly learn the key companies, hire a new senior sales rep to come in and take over all the accounts that the seller was handling. And then there was a big industry trade show in early November where we had to then run around with the sales team, showing face, shaking hands, kissing babies, and so it was total chaos, but it was a blast, and it turned out great, and it turned out to be an incredibly warm, inviting industry, and everyone has just been so lovely, so nice, so welcoming to us, and we're having a lot of fun. But those first few months were absolutely insane.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm curious just with the sellers, were they on
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you asked that. Yeah. So one of the sellers was already retired, and so he was out of the picture. The other one, we had her help with the transition for I think about 3 months or maybe a little bit longer, but she was basically fully out by mid-November, December-ish of
wow.
2023. So she was in the office a lot. And also this business is the office of the business is about 2 hours, give or take, from where we live. We live in Los Angeles. The business is in Carlsbad, California, which is just north of San Diego. And so that first month, we went and stayed there for a month, and we're in the office 5 days a week. And most of the team coming out of COVID wasn't really in the office full time, anyways. And then we also have people in other parts of the country. And so it wasn't super crucial, but for that first month, we were there every day. And then after that first month, we transitioned to, we're there 2 or 3 days a week. But she was there every day for a couple months, and then just kind of slowly, as we got the handle of it, slowly. But for her, I think it was a little bit hard to retire. She was so used to it; it was her identity. And then once she finally did, oh, she's loving it. Traveling the world, having a blast, and so we're very happy for her. She's happy for us. It's a great relationship. And we've still kind of slowly not kept in touch as much because she just wants to ease into retirement, and but once in a while we catch up, and having that relationship is really crucial with a
That's
seller. I've heard
fantastic.
stories of contentious relationships with sellers, and things can things can still get done, but man, it's a lot better if you have a good relationship.
I 100% couldn't agree more. No, that's
Yeah.
great that that's been your experience. And how long would you say, it took for you guys to really get a handle on the business once you guys took over?
I mean, I don't know if you ever really have a handle on it because we keep discovering new. I think it really took us a full year, if not a little bit more, to not. It wasn't so much to get a handle on how it operated. That we had rather quickly. It was more or less what exactly is our growth plan? Where exactly are we going and why? And that took us about a year or so to figure out. And now that we have, it's super invigorating. And I think that's the thing that we've kind of worked through with the staff where there was a lot of changing of systems and things in the first year. Like I mentioned, so much was done on these Excel sheets and we had no proper way to like look forward and see what revenue is booked 4 months from. There was no way to see that. And so now, we have proper systems for that and proper CRM for the sales team, all these different things. And so it felt like, and we kind of got all that done by, the later part of 2024. And I said, don't think that this now means, okay, now we go back to coasting. I said, this is now we set the foundation. Now we're launching. Now we're going. Now we're really going to rip. And so it's a very different environment than it used to be.
Oh, I love that.
In
I
terms
love
of
that.
getting a handle, I think we have a handle of it now, but we did quickly. But as far as how to be great, I think we're in a much better place now than we were, initially.
No, that's amazing. I'm curious in the first year, did the business um maintain sort of where it was
It
when
grew.
you grew.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Somehow we grew it a little bit amongst all the changes of systems. So it was, it's been a lot of work, but I think that's where Helen, like I mentioned, um, we've really gotten excited about being the operators, being what we're not approaching this as though, we are the shareholders, yes, but we're not thinking of it as we're just investors, we're having, this run. We're not creating content for the business, we're not selling to the customers, we're not doing any of the design work for any of the content we create. However, we're setting a strategy, we're driving the thing forward, and even more recently, we're becoming more, I'd say, market focused, meaning that we're showing, our expertise is deep in marketing and deep in sort of high value content. And so that's an area we can be, while we're new to the collision industry, we're not new to that. And so given that's our value proposition to the industry, we're leaning into how we can be positioned as really the thought leaders and the de facto experts on marketing effectively in this industry.
And then tell us a little bit more about that. You've been in the business for now over a year. You kind of have figured out sort of where the opportunities are and how you're thinking about growing it. Tell us a little bit more about that and what you're now excited about in that this next phase.
I think because for so long, it's essentially a blue collar industry. It's repairing cars, but cars are so technologically advanced now. They're computers on wheels, and there's hundreds of millions of lines of code in every new car that's produced. Um, it's really complex to repair them. And if you have a dent in your car, you can't just get the dent pulled out because behind that dent is a radar or a lidar or part of a camera, and that has to be calibrated. And so the technicians repairing the vehicles, they have to really be significantly educated in how to do this. And so there's when you have an industry in transition like this, there's such a need for content that informs and educates and gives the industry players a lot of actionable information. And so we're really excited about that. And then it's also a real opportunity for all the companies that make products for collision repair shops because that transition means there needs to be new products. There's a lot more EVs on the road now. EVs have to be repaired differently. And the technology that you have to have, the equipment you have to have is different than gas powered cars. And so there's so much transition. So there's a need for great content, and there's also this evolving need for new equipment. Also, it's a highly fragmented industry. Almost all of the businesses, with the exception of about five, are just sort of small operators of one to, eight shops. And then there's five companies that own hundreds or thousands, and there's about 40,000-ish collision repair shops in the country. And so again, on the other side of the coin, from a searcher standpoint, acquiring businesses in a fragmented industry is very appealing if you're doing a buy then build, meaning, trying to, which that's happening left and right. There's a lot of private equity companies that are going in, buying shops or partnering with, small groups that to scale their operations. And so, um, we kind of violated that rule. There's only a very small handful of players in the media side of it, so it's not fragmented at all. Going back to your earlier question about your buy box is like you can't always check every box of the most perfect industry or the most perfect business, but what are the ones that mean the most to you, and where can you have the most value? But for us, because the industry is consolidating, an operator acquires an old shop, they got to replace the equipment, they got to upgrade things, so they need more stuff. And that stuff are our clients, are our customers, and we're thrilled to, really give them the world-class marketing services that they've just never really had before, as opposed to just an ad in a magazine or just a banner ad on a website.
That's no, that's super interesting. I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear, you obviously are loving what you're doing right now. It's apparent, but what are sort of some of your goals now, moving forward? Is it to continue just growing this business? Were you hoping to, I don't know if you and your partner had an end goal when, thinking through acquisitions, but, is the goal to sell? Is the goal to just grow this thing and continue, cash flowing? Where are you at? Where's your head at there?
It's a good question. I mean, right now, our entire focus is growing and scaling the business. We didn't buy it to flip it, we bought it to build it. And so rather than, looking for the next acquisition, we're really focused on maximizing this business that we already have. That said, though, if we do make another acquisition, it would be something that integrates directly into Autobody News. So could be a complementary media brand or a data product or something like that. If the right thing came across our plates, that's probably where we would look. But um, for us, we see tremendous opportunity in this business, and it's fun. It's just frankly fun for us to take on this challenge and transform it.
I love that. I guess
Yeah.
final question for me. I want to be sensitive of your time, Nathan, but you're sort of a serial entrepreneur. You've done a lot of different things even before buying a business, but has buying a business turned out to be everything you sort of expected it to be now that you're sort of a little over a year and a half almost in?
It isn't, it isn't. I've grown a lot in this process. I think that, you know, it I didn't expect some of the nuances around management and leadership that would need to be developed. That's a really strong aspect. And, I had always managed people throughout my career, but it was in different environments and different sizes of teams and different roles. And so this has been different. Um, and it's been exciting to learn that because you kind of learn over time that the greatest form of being able to build something that you have a vision for is to build that vision big enough that it can really encompass other people's big visions for themselves. So if you have a small vision, you're only going to have room for people that have a really small vision for themselves. So as you build a bigger vision, you can attract and grow people that either have a big vision for themselves or really expand their own scope of what they think is capable for themselves. And so I think just learning about that and going deeper into that process. Wasn't necessarily something that was on my mind. It was more spreadsheets and tactical and products and services and customers and that aspect of it. And so that
That's
I think is the different part.
that's very profound. I can really relate to that. I'm gonna start. Yeah, I'm gonna steal that line from you
Well, I
because I
stole it from
love that.
someone, so it's out there. I
I
don't know
love that.
where it came from, but it's out there.
And I guess Nathan, any sort of final words of wisdom, especially for the first time buyers out there who are maybe where you were a couple of years ago.
I think that, my experience has really colored me to say that from my point of view, be honest about where you have a real edge and lean into it. For a long time, we chased home services businesses because that's what everyone else in the search world was doing. And it made sense. And there's a reason why they're doing it. But the moment we pivoted to something we actually had real expertise in, which is media and marketing, we found the right business. As we're going through due diligence, it was a different experience where we're like, oh, now this works. Oh, this is great. Let's move to the next step. Let's move to the next step. Um, so lean into where you have a real edge. Don't just look for a good business. Look for the right business for you. It might not check all the traditional good business boxes. Like I said, on that checklist is a fragmented industry, and for all the obvious reasons. We serve a fragmented industry, but our industry is not fragmented at all. There's only a handful of companies like us in our industry. Um, but your past experience, your network, even your unique perspective, that's going to give you an advantage. It's going to give you an edge that other buyers don't have. And if you intend to operate the business, you really need that because you got to understand the business you're getting into. It's not spreadsheets. It's like I mentioned, it's people, it's real customers who have real needs. And man, if you don't understand the nuances of a business, you're gonna get, you're gonna get your face ripped off. And so you got to be careful and you got to know what you're getting into.
That's great advice, Nathan. I'm curious, I guess final question. If people want to reach out, where's the best place
Yeah.
to find you?
Oh, I'm out there on LinkedIn, Twitter. Um, I guess you just put in my name and it should come up. Yeah, I'd
Amazing.
love to connect with anybody.
Well, Nathan, thank you for so much for being, so generous with your time today. I certainly learned a lot. I'm sure others will feel the same way. So, once
Thanks for
again,
having me.
thank you for doing this. Super excited to keep following your journey. We'll have to catch up again
I'd
a
love
year
that.
from now. So,
I'd love that.
but thank you so much, and
Thank you, Helen.
let's please stay in touch.
Let's do it. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for what you're doing for the community. And, it's a lonely process and having, people that are sharing what other people are doing, giving a platform, it's really helpful. It helped me a lot. And I can speak for everyone that we appreciate what you're doing.
I really appreciate that, Nathan. Thanks so much for saying that.